Well, I had my doubts about F1 sprint races when they were first announced. I'm still not 100% convinced. I do like the pole just to be reflective of one ultimate lap. But nonetheless, if you're going to have sprints, this was pretty good. We had the packed hills around Imola, the Tifosi expecting, of course, a win, or hoping for a win from Charles Leclerc and Ferrari and Carlos Sainz to be on the podium. And there were lots of fireworks, lots of cheers, lots of shouting, lots of megaphones, lots of everything. But it was ultimately Max Verstappen who won the day, but only on 2 laps to go. It was a really good race. Off the line, Charles Leclerc, just brilliant from P2. Dirty side of the grid, of course, but Ferrari just making exceptionally good starts, as they have been doing, as I said, in the last race in Australia for the last couple of years, 3, 4, 5, 6 years probably. Just excellent off the line. Meanwhile, Max left with quite a lot of wheel spin and saying, and having the time on the radio while he's just sitting there getting blown away by Charles Leclerc, saying, lovely gear sync, guys, which was pretty succinct, I guess. Not quite sure about all the software that he's talking about there that goes into making the perfect gear sync and therefore eliminating wheel spin. And no doubt that'll be something they'll be discussing overnight as we go into the Grand Prix tomorrow. But for much of the race, it looked as if Charles Leclerc was going to win this one. He was pulling away from Max over the first 5 or 10 laps. It's a 21-lap race, so blink and you missed it on a circuit like Imola. But for the first 5, 10 laps, Charles looked to be completely in charge of the sprint. But then some graining appeared on the right front of the Ferrari. He was really quick everywhere and not as quick as the Red Bull Honda on the straight. So there again, as we've seen in the first 3 races prior to this, Ferrari making up a lot of that deficit by being so good under braking, turn-in and traction. But that paid its price on the soft Pirelli, on which everybody started except the 2 Haas drivers, Kevin Magnussen and Mick Schumacher, everybody else on the soft. So not really plunging into the unknown. Got to say here that the second untimed practice session held earlier in the day at Imola was one of the best I've ever seen. It was just non-stop long runs by everyone, really. And we'll get onto that again in a minute because some of that has a big bearing on the Grand Prix tomorrow. Actually, some of it had a bearing on the result of the sprint race as well. We'll get onto that in a second. We'll just describe what happened. From about 2/3 of the distance onwards, from about lap 15, it was clear that Charles did have this graining problem. And once you grain a soft Pirelli, it's very difficult to get it to come back again. So Max starting to close up there then, and got into the DRS about 3 laps to go and looked to be in really good shape. But on the second last corner, just gave it a bit too much throttle and lost the rear, a little bit of oversteer, and lost about a length. So he had to leave it for the following lap. And it was on that lap, they said something like, if you want to use something in the cockpit, presumably some more power, you can do it. And Max said, leave it to me, leave it to me. And I thought, wow, let's just sit here and see how he handles this. And he did it beautifully. He didn't make the same oversteer mistake. He was in the DRS coming into that second last corner. And as he went down the straight, he pulled to the right-hand side. Charles logically stayed on the left as he would, protecting the racing line. And so, and Charles was still braking really late and still doing a really good job. So it was a big move by Max to have to get him there. It was there or never, really. And he did. He was around the outside going into that. It's actually turn 2, but they call it turn 2, but I would call it the first corner. And Max just judged it perfectly. He could easily have run wide at that point, but he judged it perfectly. He just came out of the brakes and throttle at exactly the right moment, got the car in, and then effectively pulled away pretty quickly over the last lap and a half. So very, very good win for Max Verstappen. And you could say it was a result of the Red Bull doing a better job with its tyres. But again, you factor in the superior top speed of the Red Bull, which by definition means that it's using less of its tyres to do the lap if they're doing the same lap time as Ferrari. But have a look at this, because I think this is one of the reasons that Red Bull got it so right in the sprint race. Here's this is from one of the runs, as I say, 2 sets of long runs this morning. The 1-hour session was just nothing but activity. And here we see, I've done a comparison here between Max and Charles on the soft tyre. And I do that because you can see there Charles is really quick. I mean, incredibly quick. And you would think, looking at that, if they're going to race on the soft tyre in the sprint, that it was done deal for Charles Leclerc, wouldn't you? Look at that. Starts with a 19.7. The tyres do go away a little bit. He's doing a 20.6, so he's lost about a second, but that's a long run that he's doing there. Whereas Max on the soft tyre isn't as quick. Okay, he does a 20.7, so he's a second away, and then doesn't really lose anything, 20.8, you've got to say, so very consistent. Now, the thing about that is how much fuel were they running? And it's possible, I think, that Max at that point was running more fuel than Charles Leclerc. And I say this because Max said something after the race, we'll see what it's going to be like tomorrow, Sunday, when we're on the medium tyre, obviously. And I think the reason he says that is because look at this. This is the soft tyre run. And I did a comparison here just to bring Lewis, because it's always interesting to see where Lewis Hamilton is, I think, on any given day. We'll get on to him in a minute as well. This is on the soft tyre run of Sergio Perez. Just look at Sergio, how quick he was in a straight line. But Sergio Perez on the soft tyre this morning, an unbelievable run. 2 19.8s, a 19.9, 20.3, back to a 19.8, 20.7, then a 19.7, all on the soft tyre. Now, if you compare that with Max Verstappen's run, you've got to say that Sergio at that point is probably running less fuel. Dare I say, he's running sprint fuel, sprint level fuel. And that, I think, is the reason that Red Bull got it so right, because Sergio Perez did a lot of really good running on exactly the fuel load that they were going to be using for the sprint that we saw today. And that's really good use of the two drivers and the preparation at Red Bull. Outstanding, really, I think. And let's have a look at some of the other things I've put together here. This is when we went to medium tyres. You can see there again, Sergio's got to be running less fuel. And Max, here he is on medium tyres. This is what he'll be racing tomorrow off the line. And look at the consistency of Max Verstappen here. 20.6, 20.3, 20.6, 20.6, 20.5, 20.7, 20.9, 20.6, 21.0. And so it goes on. I mean, I have to say that quite a lot of drivers were really consistent. Guys like Guan Yu Zhou or Yuki Tsunoda were also, and Kevin Magnussen, really consistent. But when you're going at the pace that Max is with that fuel load on the medium tyres, that's really impressive. And at the same time on the medium, Sergio's doing those. You can see he's doing 19. So he's got to be running less fuel. But again, really impressive from Sergio Perez. Really good work by Red Bull. And as I've been saying all along, Sergio Perez, the perfect number 2 to Max Verstappen. And Carlos Sainz didn't have as good a run alongside Charles Leclerc in terms of that sort of backup this morning. He was a bit later out, didn't get as many laps in. And it didn't look as if they were running in harmony. It looked like they were doing the Carlos Sainz best possible strategy and Charles Leclerc best possible strategy. But this, to me, this is the ultimate teamwork. This is really good. Top speeds, and these are only really, they're not that relevant. Sergio Perez always quickest in the straight line, again. And George Russell, I think that's probably a toe, to be honest. But I've got to say, Mercedes not too bad this morning. George Russell actually was quickest this morning. We shouldn't get too excited about that, because as I saw it, as I could see, he was about the only runner, apart from Lewis, did a one lap run on new soft tyres, presumably with not much fuel in the car. So he did a 19.4 and Lewis a 19.9. And I've put that up because, again, George quicker than Lewis. Look, I just wanted to see where he was quicker. Sector 1, 25.2, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, 25.6. So 4 tenths in Sector 1. Again, tyre temperatures, I don't know. Sector 2, George is a tenth quicker than Lewis. Sector 3, Lewis is a tenth quicker than George. They were the two quickest laps this morning on those new soft tyres. I have done a comparison here between Sergio Perez and Lewis Hamilton, just plucking, Lewis out as a comparison with Sergio Perez, just to see where Mercedes are now on a soft tyre run. And this would have been kind of preparatory, I guess, as I said, to the sprint race. I don't know how much fuel was in the Mercedes. Probably about the same as the Red Bull, I would think, which is not full. But because if you look at that, Lewis isn't actually that far away. You can see he's doing 20.1, 20.4, 20.4. Okay, he's not doing any 19s, but there are some laps when Sergio's doing a 20.3 and Lewis a 20.4. So for the first time, that was the first time I think we've seen Lewis in any sort of rhythm, doing any sort of long run and getting into it and putting in consistent lap times. And that was, if ever there was a moment, I think, when Mercedes might be starting to turn a little bit of a corner, excuse the pun, it was potentially this morning with that run. Right at the end there, you see, that's when they put on a new set of softs. They did that one lap run, 19.9. Presumably, they had used the fuel up in the car at that point, and that was the empty fuel run. So, yeah, let's have a look at what the medium comparison looks like between Max and Charles going into the race tomorrow. Max, again, incredibly consistent, 20.6, 20.3, 20.6, just amazing, his consistency. And Charles, not as quick on the medium tyre this morning. So if Max is saying, well, you know, we'll see how it works out tomorrow, I don't know. Looking at that, he's got everything done and dusted before he gets out of bed, really, because, I mean, that is unbelievably quick, very consistent, and a very good long run to give him a massive amount of information. So, yeah, that's what happened this morning. And I think, just to reiterate the point, I think Red Bull did a really good job beating Ferrari today with that work they did with the run on Perez's car this morning, going into the sprint race. Let's have a look at some of the other results now. I'm looking down at the book. So, safety car at the end of, on the opening lap, there was a, here was I talking yesterday about turn 4, it was the left-hander after Toza. Nothing ever happens there, nobody ever goes off there. Well, they didn't really go off, but that's where Guanyu Zhou and Pierre Gasly got together. Zhou was on the outside, so you could argue that he shouldn't really have been there probably. I mean, if you're on the outside, you're always exposing yourself, particularly on an opening lap like that. And he ended up spinning off into the thing, and Gasly went off as well, or he damaged the car, came in, repaired it, and he'll be annoyed by that because the best he could do was P17 in 21 laps. So that's what the sprint does if you don't get it right on the opening lap. There was an interesting move on the opening lap. I said the two Haases were on the medium tyre, and as I say, Kevin Magnussen is a hard racer, and as they came out of the first chicane, he's got Perez behind him, and Perez is getting a run on him, and Kevin's on the medium tyre. He knows everybody else is on the soft. I guess when they took the covers off on the grid, the Haas guys probably thought, what have we done here? It was odd that they chose the medium, really. I don't know why they would have done that. But anyway, they were on the medium. And then Kevin just sort of warming up the tyres, going down the next bit of straightaway. And he would argue, yeah, just warming up the tyres, no problem doing some of this. We saw some of that at the British Grand Prix last year, didn't we? With Max and Lewis, I think. And he got a bit of a reprimand, black and white flag. But, you know, that was okay. That was it. It was Kevin Magnussen. And Kevin sort of did sink a bit like a stone, unlike his teammate, Mick Schumacher, who drove really, really well and finished P10. And think about it now. He's finished the sprint race P10. That means that in a normal world, he's made it through to Q3 and qualified 10th at the end of Q3. Brilliant. And more importantly, Mick Schumacher beat both George Russell and Lewis Hamilton to the finish. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but Mick's Haas showed no sign of the tyres going away, whereas Kevin, it looked as if he had some sort of degradation going on. It's because he sort of sank back through the field and eventually finished 8th. But getting back to it, at the safety car then, we had Lando Norris still P3, made a really good start, and he would eventually finish P5, and I don't think that's a bad result. He got passed by Carlos Sainz, as he would, and he got passed by Sergio Perez, as he would, but he was the best of the rest, and Daniel Ricciardo was behind him. So they didn't have a great morning and many laps, but very good sprint race, I thought, for the two McLarens. And Carlos Sainz did very well too, used the DRS well, very clean race, drove well, finished P4, but of course Sergio Perez, overall, if you take the picture of the weekend as we sit at the moment, is doing a much better job as the number 2 to Max Verstappen than Carlos. If you could argue he's a number 2 to Leclerc, which I'm sure is an argument that I wouldn't win because a lot of people out there think he's as quick as Charles. But I think, this was a day when Max definitely benefited from the skill of his other driver, Sergio Perez, whereas I don't think Charles had any input or benefit today from the runs this morning that Carlos did. That's all I'm saying. But Carlos, after what happened yesterday, recovered well and finished P4, which is about where he was going to finish, wasn't it? Two Red Bulls, two Ferraris in the top four, and then two McLarens. And then Valtteri Bottas did really well, started 8th, finished 7th. And yeah, I've said yesterday, Alfa looking pretty strong, and Valtteri should take a lot of credit for that. He's given stability to that team. They're working very well around him. And he was strong. He was always there. You know, where were Mercedes? Alfa Romeo just blitzed them today with Valtteri. So very, very good performance. And Fernando Alonso, P9, had some big moments in the Alpine. Unbelievable car control to get away with it. It looked as if his pace went away in terms of tyre degradation. George Russell went round and round, did a good job in what is still obviously a very difficult car, the Mercedes, and beat home his teammate Lewis Hamilton. And so all I can say is I just hope that run we saw from Lewis this morning, if they were starting higher up the grid, might parlay into some light. But who knows if that will happen or not. Yuki Tsunoda did really well, finished 12th. Sebastian Vettel also sunk a bit like a stone, having qualified pretty well in the Aston Martin, but finished 13th. Still beating Lewis Hamilton though. But Lewis did pass one driver. He passed Lance Stroll and finished 14th, having started 15th. That's how bad it's got for Mercedes. So yeah, very, very difficult times for them. And I cannot imagine now how they really feel. I know what they'll be saying to the media and sponsors and everything else, and there'll be lots of other distractions going on. But how Lewis particularly must be feeling right now, I hate to think, because 1 minute he's a racing driver, racing for world championships, and he's out there racing Max Verstappen. The next minute, his big deal is that he managed to pass Lance Stroll to finish 14th in the sprint race. You know, it's going to take a lot of grit, really, for Lewis to keep his motivation. And at the moment, as I said yesterday, you know, he's got to be out there beating George Russell, apart from anything else. And George is unbelievably quick and doing a really good job in a difficult car, as I say. So for Lewis even to do that is really difficult. And then to take the whole thing to the level where perhaps they might, at some point in this year, be up there racing with Ferrari and Red Bull, you know, is that going to happen? I mean, it's almost impossible to see that, but who knows. Rambling a bit, but only because it's a fascinating situation. We've had this rule change with these new cars, and we see the 7 times world champion, who hasn't lost any of his motivation, unlike a lot of multi-world champions, still as hungry as a dog, cruising around, finishing 14th, unable to do anything, really. And that's a very, very unusual situation in Formula One. Anyway, back to the front. Max Verstappen, really good performance. Red Bull, really good performance as well. And Sergio Perez, I think to some extent it was the driver of the day from Sergio Perez, because he looked so good in the car today. Everything he did was full of confidence, and that all came, I think, from that amazing run he had this morning in untimed practice on both the soft and the medium tyre. Anyway, that's it. Grand Prix tomorrow. Max Verstappen consolidating everything on the pole, but can he make a decent start? We'll see tomorrow.